Hello, and welcome to Life After the Family Home. Smart conversations about downsizing and planning the next chapter. Today's conversation is about one of the biggest questions homeowners face when they start simplifying. How do you know what to keep when you downsize? Because for many people, that is where the process gets difficult. Not the idea of moving, not the idea of a smaller home, not even the logistics. It is the decisions. The chair that has been in the family for years, the dishes used every holiday, the boxes in the closet, the furniture that still looks fine, even if it is rarely used, the keepsakes, the duplicates, the things connected to children, parents, milestones, and memories. This is where downsizing stops being theoretical and starts becoming personal. And that is exactly why it can feel so hard. This is something Skip Benton with Coldwell Bankers Select Real Estate in Northern Nevada has seen many times. For many homeowners, deciding to downsize is one thing. Deciding what actually comes along into the next chapter is something else entirely. Because most people are not sorting through random objects. They're sorting through pieces of life. And when you look at it that way, it makes sense that the process feels emotional. The first thing to remember is this. Not everything in the house has equal importance. That may sound obvious, but when people start downsizing, everything can begin to feel emotionally charged. Suddenly, a kitchen drawer feels significant. A spare room feels significant. A stack of old linens feels significant. Why? Because once the process starts, it is easy to feel like every decision means something bigger. But in reality, not everything deserves the same level of attention. Some things matter deeply. Some things are useful. Some things are replaceable. And some things are simply still there because no one has stopped to question them. That distinction matters. Because if every item is treated like a major emotional decision, the process becomes exhausting very quickly. So one of the most helpful things you can do is start separating important from merely present. That is a powerful shift. Another helpful reminder is this. Keeping something and valuing something are not always the same thing. There are items that mattered very much at one point in life, but do not need to continue taking up space forever. That does not mean they never mattered. It just means their role may be complete. A child's school project can have been meaningful, without needing to stay in storage forever. A large piece of furniture can have served a family beautifully, without fitting the next home. A collection can have represented a whole chapter of life, without needing to move into the next one. That is not disrespect. That is perspective. And perspective makes downsizing easier. One of the best questions to ask is this. Would I choose to bring this into the next chapter of my life on purpose? Not, did I once love this? Not, was this expensive? Not, would it be a shame to let it go? Just this. Would I choose it again for where I am now? That question cut through a lot of mental clutter, because downsizing is not only about honoring the past. It is also about making room for the future. And when you frame it that way, the decisions start to change. Another useful question is, does this support the life I am living now, or only the life I lived before? That can be a very revealing question. Maybe there's a formal dining set for gatherings that no longer happen. Maybe there's exercise equipment never used. Maybe there are rooms full of just-in-case items. Maybe there are boxes packed for reasons no one quite remembers. A lot of homes contain objects that make perfect sense for a different season of life. A busier household. Children at home. Large family holidays. Different hobbies. Different routines. But if the season has changed, it is okay for the belongings to change too. That is not loss. That is alignment. And sometimes alignment is exactly what downsizing is meant to create. Now, let's talk about why this gets emotional. For many homeowners, the emotional challenge is not really about the object itself. It is about what the object represents. A lamp may represent a parent. A set of dishes may represent years of family dinners. A piece of furniture may represent the first home, a marriage, or a chapter of building a life. That is why people sometimes feel caught off guard by their own reactions. They look at an item and think, why is this so hard? It is only a table. But often, it is not only a table, it is memory, identity, history. That is important to understand. Because when you recognize that reaction, it becomes easier to handle it with more patience. It also helps to remember that memory does not live only in objects. That matters. An object can be meaningful without being permanent. A memory can remain even if the item does not. A photograph can preserve something. A story can preserve something. Passing it to the right person can preserve something. Not every meaningful item has to stay in the house to remain meaningful. That idea can make a big difference. Another thing that slows people down is guilt. And guilt shows up in a lot of different ways. Guilt because someone gave it to you. Guilt because it cost money. Guilt because you think you should want it more than you do. Guilt because getting rid of it feels somehow ungrateful. But guilt is not a great system for deciding what belongs in the next chapter of life. If an item is being kept only out of obligation, that is worth noticing because obligation fills a lot of closets. It fills garages, cabinets, spare bedrooms, storage units. And over time, it quietly makes life heavier. Downsizing is often about noticing that weight and deciding not to carry all of it forward. That is why one of the healthiest questions is simply, if this were not already mine, would I bring it into my life today? That question removes a lot of emotion, and it makes the answer clearer. If the answer is yes, keep it. If the answer is no, then maybe the item belongs to the past more than the future. Another practical thing that helps is to think less about what you're losing and more about what you're protecting. You may be protecting ease, simplicity, space, mobility, time, peace of mind. Because the real goal is not to keep the maximum number of possessions. The goal is to create a home that supports the way you want to live. That means the right things matter more than the number of things. That is a big mindset shift. It is not about fitting a life into less space. It is about choosing what deserves space. Now, when people get stuck, it is often because they try to make too many hard decisions in one sitting. That usually does not work. Instead of trying to solve the entire house, it helps to sort by level of emotional difficulty. Start with easier categories. Extra kitchen tools, duplicate towels, unused decor, old paperwork. Items that are clearly practical rather than sentimental. Why start there? Because those decisions build confidence. They create momentum. And momentum matters. Once the easier categories are handled, the harder decisions feel more manageable. You do not begin with the most emotional box in the house. You build toward it. That is a much better approach. It also helps to give yourself permission to keep a smaller number of truly meaningful things. Downsizing does not require becoming ruthless. That is where some people get nervous. They assume downsizing means stripping life down to the bare minimum. It does not. It means becoming more intentional. There is a difference. You do not have to keep everything meaningful, but you also do not have to part with every meaningful thing. You can choose a few pieces that truly matter. The photo album that tells the story, the chair that really belongs in the next home, the dishes that still get used and still feel special, the keepsake box that holds what matters most. That is very different from trying to preserve every single chapter all at once. Sometimes the goal is not to keep more. It is to keep better. Another challenge comes from family. Sometimes homeowners are ready to simplify, but hesitate because they are not sure whether children or relatives may want certain items. That is understandable. But it helps to be practical. If family members want something meaningful, they need to identify it, claim it, and usually make a plan for it. What does not work very well is keeping large amounts of stuff indefinitely because someone might want something someday. That creates delay without clarity. So, if there are important heirlooms or family items, talk about them early. Keep the conversation simple. What matters? Who wants it? What realistically fits into someone else's home or life? Clear conversations prevent future frustration. And then they reduce the burden on the homeowner trying to make all the decisions alone. As the process moves forward, one of the best ways to stay grounded is to keep coming back to one idea. What do I want my next home to feel like? Calm, simple, comfortable, easy to maintain, less crowded, easy to maintain. More peaceful? That vision helps. Because once you know what you want the next chapter to feel like, it becomes easier to decide what belongs there. If the future home is meant to feel lighter, easier, and more manageable, that becomes a filter. Then, the question is no longer only, can I keep this? It becomes, does this help create the kind of life I want next? That is a much stronger question. So, if you're standing in the middle of a house filled with years of life and wondering how in the world to decide what stays, start here. Not with pressure, not with perfection, and not with the idea that every choice has to be final all at once. Start with honesty. What is useful? What is meaningful? What still fits? What belongs to the next chapter? And what is simply taking up space because no one has paused long enough to decide? Those questions will take you a long way, because downsizing is not really about getting rid of your life. It is about choosing what parts of your life you want to carry forward with purpose. And when you approach it that way, the decisions usually become clearer. Not always easy, but clearer. And clarity is what makes progress possible. Thank you for joining this conversation on Life After the Family Home. Smart conversations about downsizing and planning the next chapter. For more guidance, connect with Skip Benton with Coldwell Banker Select Real Estate in Northern Nevada